Mayor Brownrigg, may begin.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Sorry, every microphone's different, so I got to try to figure it out. So welcome back. This is our first in-person meeting like this in about 3 years. Unlike the two former mayors who had to regretfully explain why we were all remote, I get the great pleasure of welcoming everybody back. So I'm delighted to have everyone here. We do have a couple of topics that we suggested, but what I wanted to stress here at the beginning is that I see this as a conversation. We all love Burlingame. We all know a lot about what's going on. And so it's a chance for us to talk about these subjects, but also if there are other issues, then we can touch on them. When I look back over the last few years, I am struck by how much we have done and also how much we still have to do. And so I want to take just a moment there to do something I should have done this morning at the groundbreaking, which is to thank our tireless staff and our city manager for getting Burlingame in the place that we are today. One of the most respected governments and city staffs, I think, on the peninsula. So just briefly, you guys are probably aware of it, but something that we pay a lot of attention to, obviously, is budget. And, COVID was hard for us. A lot of cities across the country actually wound up almost being ahead, because when the government didn't know quite what was going to happen, how long we'd all be shut down, they created a subsidy program. And for the most part, the federal government expected the impact to cities to be in sales tax, that there would be a lot less sales tax. And they created a subsidy aimed at more or less covering what they thought the sales tax hit would be. It turns out that COVID's hit to sales tax was sharp, but much shorter and much more quick to recover than people thought. So a number of cities wound up ahead, actually, financially, which is a little known truth. Not true for Burlingame. As you all probably know, if you look at the general funds, roughly $75 million we used to pay for police and sidewalks and parks. In the full year before COVID hit, we made $29 million from hotel tax. In the full year of COVID, the first full year of COVID, that dropped to $5 million. We lost $24 million off a $75 million operating budget. And it was thanks to the stewardship that the city staff and councils present and past did to put money away, that we were able to basically cover those deficits without, I think, any resident noticing a blip in service. We didn't lay anybody off. We didn't have to furlough anybody. But we spent most all of our unassigned fund balances, the sort of stuff we keep for those big projects that we have it in our back pocket. And as a result, we all have to be mindful of the fiscal impact, and we're still recovering, is I guess the message I wanted to share. I mean, the good news is the forecast this year is we'll be back to 18 million for hotel tax, still a far cry from 29, but a lot better than 5. And then, again, context, I think we all, and I really mean all of us, deserve a pat on the back for the general plan. So collectively, we got that done in 2019. A lot of cities and communities and governments around here complain about housing. They fight, they wrestle, they don't know what they're going to do. We just went out and got it done. And so we thought that there might be as much as a 20 or 25% increase in housing units over 10 years. And the fact is, so that we're a city, just a quick numbers thing, 6 square miles, 3,800 acres. In the last 12 years, because it actually predates the general plan, we've rezoned or upzoned 450 acres. So 12% of our city, we have rezoned or upzoned. I'm not sure there are too many other cities on the peninsula who can make that claim. And because of the general plan, we have now seen, and we have 13,000 housing units. The number of housing units that have now been approved and are being built, 2,158, of which 386 are affordable. And we have another 457 in the pipeline, of which 181 are affordable. In total, 2,600 plus new units, of which 560 plus are affordable. So that's a 20% increase in housing units just since the general plan was approved. That is a tremendous accomplishment for those of us, all of us, who care about making sure Burlingame stays open to new families, stays welcoming to teachers, stays the kind of diverse community that we've been, I think for 100 years. So I think we should be super proud. And just to put that in perspective, that would be the equivalent of San Francisco, where we hear a lot of preaching about how we all should do better. That would be the equivalent of San Francisco adding 80,000 housing units. So bravo to Burlingame, bravo to the Planning Commission and to the rest of us. Quickly, we are going to be adding almost 4 million square feet of new office space over on the Bayside, thanks to, again, the plan and your guys' work. That's profound. That's going to change the Bayside. It's going to create a great uplift in public amenities. We are, in the old days, I think a lot of communities along the Bay turned their back on the Bay. It's where the landfill was. It's where sewer water went. Nobody wanted to know about the Bay. We're finally figuring out that it's an asset. And we're embracing it with new construction that then leads to a new Bay Trail, new recreational activities. I mean, it's going to be, I think, fantastic when it gets built. And then finally, I just want to, again, sort of pat ourselves on the back. The town square, which was called out, Jen, you remember back in the downtown plan of 2007 as a vision, is finally going to become a reality next year. It will be my pleasure to watch Mayor Colson, I think, do the ribbon cutting. I think it's going to be in your administration.
Finally, it's not your card.
I'll hold one end of the ribbon.
But imagine being a built-out city of 100 years old and creating a town square for the residents. So it's really pretty it's pretty cool. And so I wanted to do that as a backdrop. And if time permits, and I'm pretty good about managing a meeting to time, I'm going to pause at some point and ask everybody to make this a conversation. One thing that you're proud of that we've done in a kind of land use format, and one thing that you'd like to see us do, like collectively, what would we like to get done in the year ahead? So you can think about that. We'll come back to that at the end, towards the end. Anyway, so thank you all for the hard work that you guys have done. Thank you for giving up your evenings. Thanks to staff. We all live here, so we don't have too far to go afterwards. It's not true for all of our staff. So appreciate everyone's time. And with that rambling introduction, I will now hand it off to Kevin.
Great. Thank you, Mayor Brownrigg, and welcome everybody. We
Sorry,
appreciate you all being here.
sorry. This is a pet thing of mine. So when we're off out of the council chambers, I like doing first names. So I don't feel a need to do Commissioner Lowenthal and Vice Mayor Colson. So for now, for this evening, let's be first names.
All right, Michael, thank you. So roll call, we'll just do a real quick. I'll just go down the list. Councilmember Stevenson. Here. Vice Mayor Colson. Mayor Brownrigg.
Here.
Councilmember Beach.
Here.
Councilmember Ortiz. Here. Commissioner Horan.
Here.
Commissioner Lowenthal.
Here.
Commissioner Pfaff.
Here.
Commissioner Schmid.
Here.
Commissioner Shores is absent but expected shortly. Commissioner Camarado.
Here.
And regretfully, Commissioner Say had a prior engagement. We did try to accommodate everybody's schedule, but it's a lot of people, so a lot of schedules and not almost everybody. Next, this is a formality, the request for AB 2044 and remote participation. I don't believe we have any requests. We have everybody here. This is something you'll see, and I think it showed up on the Planning Commission agenda the first time, and this is something that will be here. So should anyone have emergencies where they cannot come to the meeting but are available remotely, that's what this is for. Next is disclosure of SB 1439 conflicts from Government Code Section 84308. Any disclosures? Seeing none. We move on to the meeting overview, and as Michael mentioned, we have a few different topics here that we're excited to talk to you about. First is the Broadway specific plan, and with us tonight is MIG, who you'll remember from our general plan update. So speaking of the general plan update, they will be the consultant working with us on the Broadway specific plan as well. Then we want to have a report out from the HOPE committee, that's the Housing Opportunities, Priorities and Education Committee. And I see a member of our committee here, and we may have some also coming in on Zoom. So look forward to being able to give you a synopsis of what occurred in 4 very meaty meetings in 10 minutes and then conversation. And then last but not least, I think we will have a pause at that point for everybody to talk about the topics that Michael Brannerig had mentioned. And then the general plan build out evaluations, it's kind of more of a coming attraction. So that's a very short item that we'll have at the end. And I may put it in context depending on what we all hear from all of you this evening. So that'll be a little more improvised. So without further ado, we do want to make sure, we have public comments non-agenda, and is there anyone here? I get to play council member here, I guess, which is members of the public may speak about any item not on the agenda. Members of the public wishing to suggest an item for a future city council or planning commission agenda may do so during this public comment period. The Ralph M. Brown Act, which is the state local agency open meeting law, prohibits the city council and planning commission from acting on any other matter that is not on the agenda. Speakers are limited to 3 minutes each. The mayor may adjust the time limit in light of the number of anticipated speakers. Are there any members of the public who would like to speak on anything that is not on the agenda?
Seeing none, is there anybody online?
We have 4 attendees online, and I don't see any hands raised, and there are no public comment emails.
Great. With that, we can move to the discussion topics. And our first topic is the Broadway specific plan. This is something that we've been wanting to work on. It's an implementation of the 2019 general plan. General plan identified 2 different specific plans to work on: the North Rollins specific plan, which will be coming to the Planning Commission and City Council in the next couple months, and then now the Broadway specific plan. And the general plan did have some very general directions of kind of maybe the first thoughts of a vision for Broadway, but really this is a chance for Broadway to have its specific plan, to articulate a vision, come up with perhaps a economic development strategy, all the good things that would go into a specific plan. So without further ado, this is Dan Amsden from MIG. You'll remember him, who is also the project manager from our general plan update, and we're delighted to have MIG back to help us with this initiative.
Great, thanks, Kevin. And good evening, Mayor Michael and Chair Jennifer and everyone else. It's great to be back, and it's great to hear the implementation and success of the general plan, because I know very well firsthand the amount of energy council and commission and staff put into visioning and strategies, and it's great to see a lot of positive action that came out of that process. When as Ruben pulls up the presentation, this is a great time to connect with both groups and all of you tonight. We're really just starting the process for the specific plan for Broadway, and as we know, this is a key implementation piece that came out of the general plan update, really to look in detail of the mixed use corridor, but really have a focused project and a focused effort to go into more detail, more analysis, work with business and property owners, work with the community, and really think of ways of, I like to say, enhancing Broadway. You know, it works really well in many ways as one of the downtowns of the community and the mom and pop shops. But as I'll go through a few things that we really want to focus on as part of this project, and again, dive into more detail. So again, Dan Amsden with MIG, Ellie Gertler also here tonight. She's a great planner, urban designer, and one of our key associates working on the project. And also Rishi Dodi, who is out of state this evening, but listening on Zoom. He's actually the project manager. So he knows all of the key details. And let me make sure I can. Ruby, you may need to just click on the PowerPoint. And then, yeah, it might just be, sometimes there's windows. There we go. Okay. Perfect. Let's jump in. So the project area is shown with that black dash line. It's essentially Broadway from El Camino Real to California Drive. Talking with staff, we want to go one sort of major street deep north and south. And the idea is not necessarily thinking about big land use changes in the residential part, but really thinking intentionally about circulation, multimodal connectivity, bikes getting through this area. So we want to make sure the project area was including a lot of connections from the bike trail and overcrossing, and sort of how do people in a range of different modes of transportation, including transit, cars, but also bike and ped, move through the corridor as sort of a key focus. And so again, we're just starting this project. Actually had a kickoff meeting, walking tour about a month ago with staff where many of these photos were taken. And it was a beautifully sunny day, which was fantastic. But as part of this process, thinking about streetscape improvements or enhancements, ways we can create more pedestrian amenities, bicycle amenities, safety improvements along this corridor. It is a key connection between 101 and El Camino Real, plus with the Caltrain railroad crossing and California Drive. As we all know, there's a lot of dynamics around safety and mobility. Think about ways to enhance that. Parking is going to be a key part of this, and especially if we're looking at changes, how does that affect parking, both on street, but the city has additional city-owned surface lots similar to downtown. And the parking strategy as part of this is included in the scope, but is also a key part of the analysis. The connection to the Caltrain station and the possibility of this being a more regular station for stops as part of the elevated overcrossing project. That's a separate project, but a specific plan lets the city really look in detail on how that project affects mobility, connectivity, buses, getting people in and off, and very safely, and cars through the intersection. But also, we're going to look a lot and have a lot of discussions around land uses, not necessarily to dramatically change things, but is there opportunity for key infill projects that match the character and the scale of Broadway, but can add additional retail or additional housing. Some of these, interesting characteristics and just sort of the historical character of this area. There's a lot of these pedestrian mews or walkways between the street and sort of a half block back. And some are used a little bit, some are activated as you can see on the right, walkway into a parking area. But it's an interesting connectivity option to take a look at. And I understand they're actually old utility corridors of power lines that have some of these sort of pedestrian scale easements as well. And some businesses have already been very proactive to create these little plazas as well. So not a very big project area, but as was really framed in the general plan, a key goal of the city was to take a deeper dive and a closer look at Broadway and really think about implementation of the vision and some of the opportunities. So as I mentioned, us planners like to say infill sites, but city surface parking lots. These are city owned or other underutilized or different sites where there may be opportunities to create housing or different activations. I think really important to this project, and we were talking about this with staff at the kickoff meeting, is also the transition to the surrounding neighborhoods. A huge asset of the Broadway corridor is the amount of housing that's within walking distance of the corridor. And it really becomes this second or main street of Burlingame, however you want to look at it. But making sure the changes in the corridor as envisioned through this plan really transition and don't impact surrounding neighborhood. And not only is that density intensity, but also parking as well, and being sensitive to those adjacencies. Always important in Burlingame, thinking about the history as well. And there's a deep historical context, lots of history, lots of character. We have older buildings, some great architectural stock along this street as well. So we're going to do, as part of our scope, an initial survey for buildings and areas that might meet criteria. That was another implementation piece of the general plan, is as the city conducts these specific plans, dive a little bit deeper into potential historic resources. And those criteria, of course, we know for that. So sort of similar to the downtown plan, but taking the same approach for Broadway as well. And these are just some initial maps we've pulled together, and Ellie and the team, just to show, this one I always like kind of starting with, this is existing land use. So this is not general plan, this is not zoning. This is what's actually on the ground. So the red representing more commercial, brown residential, the gray are essentially vacant, but they're kind of those parking lots, in sort of that second level of parcels. But really thinking about what is on the ground today. This is the current zoning. Some of this was updated as part of the general plan process. but we'll be looking a little deeper into different development standards, heights, densities as part of this process, and evaluating some options. I should also mention, as part of MIG and the planning engagement urban design team, we also have TJKM to do traffic and parking analysis as part of this, and BAE for economics as we start to create some options as well. So we want to make sure there's robust analysis as part of this process. This is not being planned in a bubble by any means. So there's a lot of other city policy and guidance from the Climate Action Plan, the general plan as we discussed, but also the Bicycle and Ped Master Plan. So building upon a lot of the concepts and strategies in these documents that the Commission and Council have already weighed in on, and really looking, okay, how do they get applied, and how is that in greater detail? So this is from the general plan. This is the strategy diagram of Broadway mixed use, but now we get to jump in and dive into it some more detail. So the detail, or one portion of the detail on that, is around these three big topics. So as part of this process, looking at policy updates or regulation zoning updates as well, infrastructure and mobility changes and improvements. I should have also mentioned this is a joint project with MTC as well. And the city received a grant through MTC, so they're a partner in this. And with the Caltrain station and bus stops, really looking at opportunities to encourage transit-oriented development, essentially walking or bikeable access to stations. And just given the location of the station, it is already walkable by a lot of existing and new and proposed residential projects. But if there's ways to promote additional affordable housing as part of this project, as I mentioned, evaluating parking. We have one example here of parking exemptions, but there's other physical changes to parking, but also management of that parking, and what would those implications be? So that's part of this study, to evaluate some of the trade-offs of some of those decisions and have those discussions. Really key, and this is a big piece of the general plan, is supporting economic development, supporting the businesses that are there, but also thinking about different needs as retail or restaurant or office or other uses. What do they need as far as outdoor amenities or different types of spaces, and how does that factor into design? As I mentioned, studying historic preservation as part of this process, and really aligning this process with general plan policies as well. And as I like to say, we're diving into more detail, but the general plan really presents that framework. And then it's a little hard to see with the Zoom controls, but for infrastructure and mobility, improving safety is really key. And that is for pedestrians, that's for bicyclists, but also motorists and trucks, delivery vehicles going through here, all forms of transportation, how to work to make it more efficient, but function as best as it can for the different users. And of course, the regional connections with Caltrain and the station is a big piece of this as well. So key to all the processes, and this is what we're really starting to frame right now at the beginning of the project, are the engagement goals. But we want to make sure we're reaching a lot of voices, so property owners, business owners, local residents, the broader community as well, but have a lot of different methods between website updates and surveys, but also pop-up events tied to times that it's very busy on Broadway. We want to capture a lot of voices and a lot of people. But through this process, try to be transparent, show a lot of information and trade-offs, as I mentioned, but try to get that consensus building around the future vision and some options and alternatives. Well, speaking of the general plan, here's our advisory committee from that project, but we're also going to be forming an advisory committee as part of this project, and that was recommended by staff. And the role of the advisory committee is really to dive into a lot of detail as we start to craft this plan, and we'll be checking in with them throughout the course of the project. This is actually one potential question for council and commission tonight. We're just starting to craft what the advisory committee composition could be and the overall engagement plan. But we're thinking the committee could include one or two council members, likely someone from the Traffic Safety and Parking Commission makes sense as well, given those are going to be topics, potentially planning commissioner as well, but also business leaders from the bid, realtors, chamber of commerce, who's doing that economic work on the corridor, so to speak, residents, property owners. So we're starting to sort of frame the composition of this committee, but we want to make sure One, it represents a broad swath of interests and ideas, but also this is not going to be an overly heavy commitment project, maybe 4 meetings. But we want to make sure everyone has the ability to participate and really be engaged, because we're hoping to have a lot of good discussions as part of that advisory committee. Workshops, pop-up events are definitely a part of this, as well as we start to refine different deliverables and ideas. This is just a schedule graphic I'd like to go through real quick, and you've probably seen these before. There's our overall timeline to be completed by the end of 2024 with the plan. But as part of that, we sort of have 3 big components to this. One is the technical advisory committee, and that's really senior staff. So Public Works, Kevin and the planning team, city manager's office. But that's to review materials, data, make sure things are accurate, and do some of the technical analysis from the staff end. And then we have in this sort of blue row, really the community process, which includes the community advisory committee, workshops, and pop-up events. And they're intentionally structured for us to go to the staff technical advisory committee first, then go to the CAC to get their perspective and refinement, then take those ideas out to the community, and then report back to commission and council, and kind of go through a similar process 3 times as we go through the project. And at the bottom is the different reports analysis that get updated and refined based on commission and ultimately council direction as we go through each one of these phases. So this project is a planning project, a specific plan. As I mentioned, we are doing traffic and economic analysis and some historic preservation work as well. The CEQA piece, or the EIR piece, is actually after this project. So the grant right now is to cover the planning side of it, but we'll make sure we're teeing up analysis so we can efficiently go into a CEQA process. And I'd be remiss to show the final line, that is council and planning commission check-ins as well. So as we go through this process, again, we'll be checking in regularly and making sure you're hearing the feedback, we're hearing from the community, those decisions and ideas around alternatives. We're checking in with council and commission. So as mentioned, we're kicking off the project. So tonight's kind of a release party that we're jumping into this process, but I'd love to answer any questions council or commission may have on the process.
So thank you for that. And, obviously it's all brand new. It's all very early for all of us. So if, I'd open the floor to either questions or comments or issues you want the team to look at as they start to develop this. Does anybody want to kick off?
I'll go, Mr. Mayor.
Yeah, please.
So when we first got the agenda and I saw that this was on the docket, my first thought was, gosh, I hope we can keep Broadway local, small, eclectic. That's where we shop. It's kind of where somebody told me that that was the real downtown Burlingame a long time ago, and I think there's certain truth to that. So my fear is that if we do certain things, that we're going to include these large residential projects that are going to ruin the whole feel of the street, and that we're going to create larger retail spaces that'll again make it a little less interesting. So I'm just hoping we can keep it a little crazy.
Fair enough. Yeah, Peter, did you?
Thanks, Michael. I wasn't around in 2007 and the execution until the Burlingame Avenue development in the downtown. But I'm interested in, is there a summary of lessons learned from all of that process that we need to ingest, apply? I'm assuming we're doing that in many respects from a planning standpoint anyway, but it would be interesting to say, what were the things that were not anticipated? And how do we make sure we structure that into how we come up and evaluate and settle on a plan?
Cool. Good point. Sandy.
Yeah, so I think having grown up on Paloma on the 1300 block, that's my neck of the woods, and grew up walking to the train station to pick up my mom in the evenings and walk home. I think the biggest challenge in that area are the one-way streets. So for example, Paloma going one way, Cappuccino going the other way, The number of cars that are now parked on the street and the streets have become very narrow. It's hard to get through. And I know a lot of people like to cut through that little parking lot that's right behind that little market on the corner of Paloma and Broadway, because that's kind of your cut through from one street to the next. So, I'd like the traffic commission to really look at this and to think carefully on how we're going to create kind of traffic around Broadway and how people can get in and out, because it's really pretty tight there.
Sandy, I was also thinking about traffic. Do you feel that the one-ways are a bad thing or that there should be more of them? I couldn't quite tell.
I'm not sure. I think that they have to study it, but I think that the one-ways are not a bad idea. I'm just wondering if it's correct in the situation it is right. Like, I'm wondering if Paloma is the right direction it should be going, right? Should it be going down? Should it be going the other way? What is that traffic circulation that should be going? I mean, I think it'll confuse a lot of people, but maybe we need to have more of it, or maybe we need to change what's there.
I've always been surprised that Laguna is two ways. That trying to get to turn left into or right into to go to Goodwill, it's just like hair racing. Yes, Donna.
Thank you. So the one thing I really want to make sure, and it's a little bit of a lesson that we've all been handed over the past month, is around removing the parking on California Drive to accommodate the bike lanes. And we've had a lot of feedback, both in support and against it. So what we learned was outreach of the lessons learned, outreach to the local, and inclusion of the local businesses in the commentary is going to be really important. And there are some dominant voices on down in that area. And I think it's really important to include a myriad of voices, not just the loudest voices, and getting maybe some of the side street businesses involved, like, for example, Carrie Bittner, who owns Que Sera Sera and lives and works in Burlingame, would be a really important addition to that kind of a community, because I think they offer the perspective of a local business person that's trying to get to and from work. And they also know their local clientele. So I think that's really important, because what I'm worried about on this plan is that we're going to do all this work. We're going to put it all together. We're going to come up with some really great stuff. And then poor Emily, because it's in her district, and I feel so bad for you over this. I must have to say, I've been defending you for the past, all of us, but it's just tough. To do all this hard work and then have a couple of spoilers at the very end, sort of stomping their feet and whining about it, and that they don't want change and they don't want anything to be different. And Ricardo, you sort of echoed a little bit about this, keeping its quaintness and keeping it the same while trying to make it better. And that's just a tough line to balance. And I want to kind of head off those, what I'll call like help rejecting complainers who just complain about everything, but don't want to actually dig in and help. And I want to kind of force them to the table so that, when it comes to the end, we aren't in a position where people are saying, oh my gosh, you're taking away our beloved Broadway. Sandy, I hope you'll raise your hand, having grown up in that area, to maybe participate on the CAC. I do spend time down there, but there's a lot of people who are there quite often. So just trying to figure out how to do really good outreach with the local people and get them on board as we make decisions. And there's another piece that will come later, which is with our HOPE committee. We're going to talk a little bit about, some of the uses of some of the funds. And this might be a really good area to target, possibly some of the affordable workforce housing that we're trying to think more creatively about, not the huge block, big box things, which I think Ricardo just mentioned aren't really fitting in there, but the more smaller infill, thoughtful, like 4 to 8 type units.
Thank you. Yeah, John.
So, when we went into COVID and we decided, let's test closing down Broadway and leveraging it as a pedestrian. And I thought that I liked the idea, But the side component of that was we totally ransacked the side streets
Yeah.
because they're undersized. And as much as we'd like to say that all of those people live within a quarter mile of public transportation in actually both directions, there's a lot of cars. And, you know, the one parking lot that is really like a throughway behind Broadway Market, not right behind, but actually in the next block, going up to Cappuccino, I think. That provides some relief and some ability for the residents in that area to park and not all be on the street. I mean, I actually use that parking lot, but then it is tough going through those streets because they're barely as wide as my car. And I think that, you know, we're seeing more people want to do 10 and 12 and 15 units on these small parcels because they are multifamily, but and we're saying more housing, but some of these areas can't handle that now. They don't handle the 3 and 4 units that they have. And so before we say let's infill parking lots, we should consider what is the relief valve for some of these streets to be a bit more user friendly and not just crowd more people in that block, because the block north and south are hugely busy. So
I wonder if an interesting question to study, or maybe people have immediate reactions, is whether, and I want to stress, I'm saying whether, not I think it's a good idea necessarily, but whether constructing a parking garage on the Chula Vista lot, for example, which could then, you know, create a lot more public parking, might be something to look at. Yeah, Emily.
Thanks. No, great discussion. I could not be more excited that we're finally doing this. And I think that of all the specific plans, I'm really glad that we're prioritizing this one after Rollins Road, because it feels like when we talk to constituents, everybody has ideas about how to make Broadway the best version of itself. But what we've seen in the general plan is when we set policy documents, they really work. Like, things start to happen, maybe not immediately. So I think that we're going to be really thoughtful about Broadway and consider the character and the scale, but kind of like really be careful with those levers, because change will happen. And we need to think as a community about how much change do we want and what kind of change. So without being like a repeater of the great stuff that you put forth in this initial kind of throw ideas out, I just wanted to add a few more things I hope we're thinking about in this. Beautification of Broadway, I think, is a really important issue. I hear from constituents always talking about they want to see more public art. They want to see, I don't know, they want to see murals. They want to see those pedestrian pathways be more green and beautiful. So I wonder if there's a place to really think about green infrastructure, more trees, artwork, green space. Can we leverage those surface parking lots to higher uses? And then can we add some additional relief in green space? I think those are interesting questions. I don't know what the answer is. Circulation, I think, is critically important. I'm glad, you know, Sandy tagged those, and John. You know, is there a question to be had? Is the parking, like we did on Burlingame Avenue, is there a place for parallel parking so we can widen those sidewalks? I don't know. We also have to be realistic and say that Broadway is the major arterial for trucks, for people coming on and off the highway, for people from Hillsborough going back to their homes. So it is not a side street, it's a major arterial. So I think the circulation questions are really interesting. And also those north-south connections with, as we envision bike boulevards through our community. Broadway is a critical intersection for how pedestrians and cyclists move through north-south. So I think there's some really interesting stuff. Thank you for bringing up the architectural value that exists on Broadway. I'm excited we're thinking about that as we consider change, because we do have some historic buildings. And I think those were just the main things I wanted to flag, but I'm glad we're being thoughtful, because change will happen, and it's just how much do we want and what kind. So thank you.
I know we haven't, Sean, may I make?
Oh, you go.
Sure.
But may I make just a quick comment, Jen, before you go, and John? So I do want to, so I have, for better or for worse, the scar tissue over 8 years on planning commission and now, 13 on council. So I've actually seen specific plans that worked. If by work, we mean create change, and ones that didn't. And I remember the debate in 2007 over the downtown plan, where initially it was decided that we should raise from like 20 feet to 30 feet. And, and that was it, put a cap at 30 feet to keep the downtown in a scale of 30 feet. But the community, led in part by former Mayor O'Brien and me on planning, really pushed to go to 50. Because the fact is, if it's a privately held building and it's 1 story, no one's going to redevelop that into a 2-story building. And so, and I say this because the north end of Burlingame, the north end of El Camino, that specific plan, we thought we had created enough incentives to see that those tired old office buildings redeveloped, and not a single one of them changed because there wasn't enough new for them. Whereas the downtown plan really has created change, and obviously Rollins Road created a ton of change. So I would just say, I completely respect the view, like, let's keep Broadway the way, in a pedestrian scale, the historic scale. But I think we've got to be careful not to kid ourselves. You're not going to get them to add 1 story if you want to see something change. Anyway, that's just my experience. But Jen, over to you. Oh, sorry.
No,
Em.
I think to add on to that, you're exactly right. The economics are everything. And that's what I think is so exciting about this process, because it's going to really weigh the pros and cons of how that,
Right.
what that means to the community if we go up, and what,
Mhm.
what structure is worth a developer to come in and do it, and what's not. So yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Over to Sean.
Yeah, I love the quaintness of Broadway. I'm concerned over my last year of planning commission, we've approved a lot of square footage on that Bayshore frontage, not a lot of public amenity, not a lot of guaranteed restaurants. You're gonna have a lot of people coming into this area, also with our housing bonuses. We're getting a lot of housing where we should be very proud of, but where are these people gonna eat? Where are they gonna go to lunch? And so, well, they'll go to Broadway. Well, if we keep it small and quaint, no one will be able to get a table. It'll be 2 hours for lunch, 3 weeks to get a reservation for dinner. I don't know the answer to that question, but that's what I'm concerned about, is we're gonna have a huge amount of density hitting Broadway. With not a lot of reprieve on the Bayshore side, at least currently. Rollins Road could be part of that, but I think a lot of people are gonna be heading to Broadway in higher numbers than what we're seeing currently.
That's an interesting observation.
And so to Ricardo's point, I agree with you. I like the quaintness, but can you keep it quaint when you're also developing your city to a certain level? That's
Interesting question. Jen.
Yeah, so I have initially when I saw the outline, I thought that is a big area. And why are we doing such a big area? Especially because there is overlap with what we already just did with the general plan. But I understand now with the traffic patterns and such, I hadn't really thought about that, but that's true. That part's important. But what I'm a little worried about is not so much, I think there are answers to Broadway. I think there's ways to figure that out, keep it nice, and some parts in scale and some parts building up using parking lots or whatever without going crazy. What I'm more worried about is that we already have, I don't know how many parcels are involved. I was going to ask you, 500 were involved in the downtown plan. How many parcels are we talking about in that area?
I have not been able to count them
Didn't
up
do
yet.
your homework.
I'm sorry.
I don't think it's 500, but it's a lot.
Yes, we'll have a range.
It's a lot of parcels. So there already are two and R3 already, right? Everything. There's no R1 in there. There already.
Yeah, there are.
Are there R1?
Yeah.
Not many.
Paloma has
mainly-
R1s.
Are there R1s?
Most of our ones are on the
Aqua
north
Paloma.
side.
Are they in the north?
Yeah, once you go about 3, 4
Okay.
properties in,
Yeah.
then it's no
Then it-
longer.
Oh, then it changes. Okay, got it. Okay, very good. So what concerns me is, because we're seeing it in the housing stuff in planning commission already, the changes in, the state law, so that whatever we're deciding for the general plan is really just tentative, because they are allowed to do more expansive setbacks or reductions of setbacks of this and that. And so what you are envisioning as being, something handleable on these little streets could easily, I think, with reductions in the parking, which they're also allowed, could easily be complete gridlock. And to make the leap that everybody's going to take a bike or a, walk, maybe some people will be great, but some people can't. So I'm a little concerned that it is a big area and that, or I guess I should say, I hope the state lever is considered as a variable, and that we need to be careful when we get to the standards point that we don't go too far, because whatever it is, it's going to go further down the road with the state, if I'm making any sense, because we're seeing it already. So
Bonuses, you mean?
the bonuses.
Factor in the.
You
bonus.
have to build in a balloon in there, I mean, I think, or we're not going to get that point. We're going to get a very congested area all around, and people are going to be kind of freaked out if they see they're in this big area, and going to be now part of this big plan, and they're looking what's happening all over. So I'm kind of both ways, and but it's definitely, it already has some what's the word? There's already things built in that you can't really change. It's just the way it is, and it's not a bad thing. So it's just paying attention that we don't go too far. Bless you, go too far. And I did just want to ask, because I'm not as familiar with the green space there. Is there a park or anything? No. So I just did want to say that.
Not in that
Laguna,
area.
but it's not close.
There's one near.
Laguna. It's closer.
Laguna.
Got it.
closer to Mills, yeah.
Okay, thank you. Those were my comments, just cautionary.
Thank you. Chris, do you want to?
Yeah, maybe second Sean's point, I do agree that, can we keep it quaint with all the extra volume? It might trigger the thought of a third downtown that needs to be built on Rollins or in the Lenardi's parking lot, or because I don't know that we can keep it quaint and develop it at the same time. And then the other maybe point is to make sure the Community Advisory Committee really thinks of this in the context of the grade separation.
Yeah.
Because that's going to be a huge change to that area. And I think they need to really envision it in that light.
Thank you. Yes, Peter.
And maybe this is for the Traffic and Safety Commission. But I'd like to understand that circulation from a standpoint of, right now Broadway is a major arterial transit west or east to west through the city. They go down Broadway, they're not stopping to shop. They're getting to Hillsborough, they're getting to El Camino and heading north or south, or they're turning off early. And grade separation is going to increase that flow because there won't be the queuing factor that's currently on the overpass as much as there is right now. And I think about San Carlos and their downtown, at least the major east to west. It's actually offset a block off the exit off of Holly or whatever. And is there any traffic studies that are keeping tabs of what is that volume coming through that is in transit commuting versus, and maybe this is time of day, versus shopping, local neighborhood, that type of thing? I think it's very important that we understand that. And that might open up possibilities that there are developments on the periphery of this that allow for a better east-west circulation for those who are actually in transit, rather than trying to funnel them down the corridor. That is a bigger project. It's a bigger implication. And there may not be an option, but I do know right now there's lots of cars that go down California and then zoom up Floribunda, zoom up Carmelita, whatever. So while the defined element is a block north and south, the transit circulation is, I think, even broader. And so we need to make sure we have the right research to be able to inform what we do.
Thank you for that.
One more thought,
please.
sorry. One more thought, maybe not having street parking. I mean, I think a lot of residents will be very upset at me saying that. I will be very upset. I mean, street parking on any of those those streets right off of Broadway, it's just horrible. So either maybe no street parking during the business day, and then at night residents can
Yeah.
park there until 8 in
I
the
mean, it's the
morning.
closest thing we have to San Francisco.
It is, it's pretty,
Really it
it's
is.
pretty
I
bad
think
down
that's-
Well,
there.
these are things the team can study, you know,
Yeah.
and understand what some of those trade-offs would be, good or bad.
Michael.
Yes, please,
clarification.
Ricardo.
So I just want to just clarify. So when I talk about quaint, and I'm not saying stays the same, because clearly we're here to talk about changing it, obviously. So my fear is those large projects that are a whole block and they go right to the edge of the property and they're make it so that it's not walkable, it's not a nice place to be. So what I'm suggesting, and I'm not opposed to height, I'm fine with height, as long as we have some to keep it interesting. My fear is there's sections of Redwood City where you walk and there's these big monster projects and that take up a whole block and they're not interesting. They really
there's-
kind of ruin the neighborhood
And there's no sun.
and there's no sun. So that's what I was may clarify. And then let's talk about for a second about the retail. Because I don't know that we can increase the square footage of retail in that area. There's just
Unless you go up.
not much more to grow. So when you're saying
Go up.
there's gonna be more people coming, I think we're limited as to the size of retail on the ground floor, so it's gonna be what it is. And so anyway, that's my thought. Thanks.
No, I appreciate that. I do want to make sure we manage to time and cover housing. I would, if you would let me have a sight line, I just want to see if any members of the public would like to speak on this subject. And in particular, I noticed that one of our traffic commissioners is here, not to put you on the spot, but would you like to comment? Would you like to comment on this item or not?
I'll go ahead.
Why don't you introduce yourself to Athen?
I'll seize the moment. Athen Revelos, Burlingame resident and Traffic Safety and Parking Commission Vice Chair this year. Actually, Broadway is actually an area that I frequent. And I do have, I've actually discussed with some folks some ideas for that area already. So I'm kind of excited that there's this opportunity for reimagining the area. I think there is, it's interesting listening to this because I'm hearing a lot of different perspectives that I've never heard and some that I thought I would live long enough to hear, which is a good thing. I'm hearing them sooner than later. So I'm optimistic, but I think there is, and I do think that there is an opportunity for retail to grow, and I have been an advocate for the small businesses in Burlingame. I think they're essential to quality of life. You need to have your, real estate agents and insurance agents and, shoe shops and
Cobblers.
yeah, cobblers, yes. Thank you. I appreciate that. So you need to have those businesses, those service businesses, and that's in part why I'm on the forthcoming agenda item, the housing committee, is because I think that the housing is essential to retaining these services for the city. So I guess to summarize, what I'm trying to say is I'm very optimistic about what I'm hearing, and I'm actually looking forward to maybe having the opportunity to participate in this from the TSPC perspective.
Thank you. Thank you.
Okay.
And by the way, anybody can always participate. There will be official committee members, but we should always encourage anybody to come along and it's always better at the front end than at the very end. I mean, by the time this reaches council in 18 months, anybody who thinks they're going to make a significant change to it is like, no. So this,
Let's just say one last thing.
please.
I do think Athen made a good point. I think we've all talked about it. Like housing and people are the lifeblood of a local neighborhood. That's what keeps the local businesses. So the more like people we can bring down there to make it walkable, to make everything they need at the market and the cobbler and the grocery store and the whatever. So I do think the housing component of what we do on Broadway, potentially more multi-unit thoughtfully done, is an exciting thing to explore. So I really do appreciate that comment as well. We're going to keep the retail going.
I do too. So I appreciate all of this input. I think it's great right here at the front end. It's just coincidental that the timing worked like this, but I think it worked really well to give you guys sort of a launching pad. And I'm going to share, this is a personal view, which is one of the reasons that we all did the hard work, in my view, with the general plan was yes, we think we need more housing. Yes, it concerns us that young families are leaving Burlingame because they're getting priced out. Yes. But no, we don't think housing has to go everywhere, like at least not high density. And so we created a plan where we took 80 acres of Rollins Road. There's a lot more capacity there for housing. And so from my point of view, from any sort of moral obligation that I think we all feel to creating housing, I don't think it has to be created on Broadway. I don't think you have to do that. We have stepped up. I gave you the statistics. We've already created 20% uplift in units. We have more capacity on Rollins Road. So if it's best for the plan, if it's best for our community, then by all means. But if not, you don't have to. That's the beauty of us having stepped up in the way we did, where we put housing where we want it, where we think it works for our city. We're now, I think, off the hook from just cramming housing everywhere. So I just wanted to sort of conclude with that as we work through this process. If it's better for Broadway, it's better for the community, by all means, but we have room for a lot more housing still in a place where it won't impact crowd and so forth. So yeah, Donna.
Just commenting on that. I think an interesting element of the Broadway neighborhood is trying to think differently about homeownership and figuring out if there's ways that we can allow these small 3-4 unit sort of buildings, sort of what we're talking about, not necessarily building up. Is this a neighborhood where we can encourage more entry-level first-time homebuyer housing so that as we think about it, maybe we don't go up and go big and go dense, but we say, we'll let you convert your apartment building into condos because we aren't going to have an impact. And we think more creatively about the size of condos and ways to encourage condominium building and home ownership and create that as sort of what I would call our entry-level neighborhood. So I just throw that out for.
That is interesting and very timely at the groundbreaking today of the Helios project that you guys approved. One of the people said, I started my life in an apartment on Laguna, and now they're in some big house in Hillsborough. So good for them. All right. We've run a little bit long, but I think it was a good topic and really nice that we had all this expertise in the room right here at the beginning. Can we shift on to Hope?
Yes, I do want to just back up for a second. I'm looking at the online list. If there was anyone who wanted to comment on the Broadway
please
specific plan who is watching from home, please raise your hand. And then we can move on to the next item. I do see John Carvanian has raised his hand. So if we can allow him to speak,
yes,
and then we'll move on.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you for having this discussion. I greatly appreciate it. I had several comments to make, but I'm going to keep the comments to myself because one of the council members indirectly said that there are a couple of loud voices on Broadway. So I rather have other members of the Broadway Merchants Association comment their concerns in the future. I just want to say that I spend 600 to 700 hours a year volunteering for the Broadway bid. I give my life to Broadway. And when there's an issue where we have the transparency issues, the bike lane issue, where the bike lane was planned, discussed for 2+ maybe 3 years. And the left turns were never mentioned. The parking, removal of the parking was, but the left turns were never mentioned, which would have impacted our residential neighborhoods and Broadway downtown. We spoke up and we became the bad guys. But let me say something. As an elected board president of the BID, I'm here to defend and help not only the merchants, but the community members of Burlingame. I work day and night to make Burlingame a better place and Broadway a better place. I take care of issues every day with merchants and community members. And I am offended when one of the council members tonight says that there are a couple of loud voices. That is an insult when we spend hundreds and hundreds of hours working our tail off, giving up our business to do good for others. I commend my wife for helping me during the day so I can solve problems on Broadway for merchants and community members.
John,
And I appreciate your help. Thank you very much.
and we appreciate you, John. And everybody's allowed their voice, and nobody up here doesn't think so. We all know how much you and really there's a deep love along Broadway. I mean, John, your volunteering is legendary, but you think about Gerald at WiMAX, you think about Ross Bruce. There are a lot of really strong, long-standing voices on Broadway who want what's best, and we all want what's best, John. So we look forward to you being an active participant in this process over the next year and a half, and your merchant community as well. So thank you for those comments. Is there anyone else in the audience?
Nope, that was it.
Okay. Yes.
I just want to say, so all I'm saying is that sometimes there are quieter voices that don't get heard. And I just want to make sure that those voices also have a seat at the table.
Yep.
And that's all I'm saying. I'm not accusing anybody or anything. And I'm sorry, John, if you took offense to my statement of wanting to make sure that all the community had a voice, and including small businesses that maybe aren't as active in the bid or other things. It's just making sure that everyone is included and that everybody gets notified, gets messaged, and has an opportunity to speak. That's it.
Right. And when we don't do that right, we see what happens. Example, the bike lane.
Yeah.
So I think that's the priority for all of us. No other comments from the, okay, then I would like to move us on in the interest of time to our Hope Committee and the work that was done with a dedicated group of citizens.
Great, thank you. And this is a good segue. I think the Hope Committee showed us how well a community advisory committee can be run. We benefited from Susan Clark, who was our facilitator. You may remember her from Home for All and Burlingame Talks Together about housing. And it's, you do want to hear from lots of voices and make sure everybody has a chance. And this was a great example of how to do that. So what's that? Sure. So give us just a second as we get the slides.
Just while you pull that up, the reason that council created this, well, you're going to go into the background.
Please do.
But I guess I just think this is a sort of one-time amazing opportunity for the city of Burlingame. I mean, you look just at the DivCo project, and assuming that goes forward, that itself will yield roughly $25 million in funding for affordable housing. So it's this remarkable source of one-time revenue. And I think council felt that this was a decision we look forward to making, but not without input from the community, from folks, renters, owners, people who cared about the community. But I'm sorry, I'm probably stealing your thunder, but I wanted to say that we saw this as a really consequential set of decisions Anyway, over to you.
Thank you very much. And I appreciate, I see some of our members of the advisory committee are here. Let's see, do I do this or do I? Okay. So what is HOPE, or the Housing Opportunities Priority in Education? This is kind of the formal mission statement, which is to prioritize the investments in affordable housing. A lot of money is coming the way. And as Michael mentioned, really we needed the community input to figure out what's the best way to invest those funds. The intent is to create homes for workers in Burlingame whose wages cannot cover their market rates or home prices. And it is very much a direct outcome of new development coming, new jobs coming with demand for housing. So that's kind of the whole nexus. I want to start by thanking the committee members. This is the whole list, and they invested 4 very dense evenings. There was a lot of information. I think a lot of people learned, including myself and Susan and Sandy Council as well, and just lots of information. And we're going to try to distill a lot of information into about 20 slides here. But should you want to see the full round of slideshows, they're on the website, the webpage for the project at burlingame.org/hope. I do want to acknowledge, thank you, Michael, and also Donna, the vice mayor. They were the city council ad hoc subcommittee for housing, and this was their suggestion. Was we started on staff by saying money's starting to come in. What are we going to do? City council talked about the funds back in 2019. We hadn't really. Partly we hadn't had the funds so we had nothing to talk about. Then there was a pandemic that kind of happened, so things kind of got, but by the time funds did start coming in, this seemed like a good time to engage. So we did turn to Susan Clark, who is really great at facilitating these kinds of conversations. And then we also enlisted Sandy Council, who was previously with the city of San Mateo with their housing program and knows lots about the ins and outs and the tools and details of affordable housing development. Myself, and also I want to acknowledge Joe Sanfilippo, our economic development housing specialist, managed this project. There were 4 meetings. The first was just an introduction overview. Then we got into values and opinions, because it's easy to just start allocating money, but we really want to think, what are we trying to do? What are the values? What are the options available to the community? What are the trade-offs? Are there baskets? Like maybe it's not, everything doesn't have to go in one direction. It may be that there's several different programs or baskets that we would want to pursue, not to the exclusion of others. And then finally, the recommendations that are in the staff report and will be further discussed at the city council meeting on Tuesday. We did start by a kind of basic who lives here. So this is similar to what we saw with the Burlingame bill, talks together about housing. So our population, the income of people who do live here in Burlingame, but also, and then who rents, who owns. It's always been kind of a split, which is unique for peninsula communities. There's just a few that have that kind of demographic, and does really work in Burlingame's favor for making it the special place that it is. But really where it comes to the housing funds is who works here. Just about as many people work here. This is now 2019 data, so we'll have to see how that changes, but probably not significantly different. About the same number of people work here as live here. What is really important and interesting is are the incomes of the people that work here. There is a large service economy here, and there is more than a third of the workforce makes less than $40,000 a year. And that's $19 an hour for full time. This is also this 33 per month is a standard data that you can look at any community across the country. It's something that the Census Bureau uses as a kind of benchmark. So we look to see how does Burlingame fit in with that. So there's a big significant portion of the workforce who makes, they've got good jobs, but it's still less than $40,000 a year. Also, the area median income, if you look at San Mateo County, so a lot of the formulas where we hear, AMI is area median income, and then different affordability levels are based on these. Area median income keeps going up and up and up in San Mateo County. So you can see here, we've just added the 2023 incomes. You can see the 2022 ones are crossed off, so they continue to go up. For an individual, the median in San Mateo County is 122,500. For a family of 4, that's 175,000. Where that really becomes a challenge for the workforce that's making $40,000 a year or less is that a lot of the formulas for the affordable housing are based off of medians. So if the medians are going up, that changes the formulas and the eligibility, and that's where it gets complicated. And we find that we're spending 4 meetings with our committee to try to figure out how to really provide the housing that the community needs, and particularly the workforce. In terms of just the logic of what is the kind of legal framework of these funds, there is a legal framework which includes some limitations. Starts with new commercial development. We just saw groundbreaking this morning with one. That brings new jobs, and with that creates the demand for housing. So that's kind of the most simplistic way of looking at how these funds arise and what they are meant to be spent on. The current balance, net balance, is a little over 7 million. Technically, there's 8.7 in the bank, but 1.4 has been allocated to an affordable housing development that came up and was just too good of an offer to refuse. So the council looked at that last fall and allocated a little over 1.4 million to close a financing gap, and we'll have a couple of slides on that coming up. This is also in the staff report. So this shows what could possibly happen in the future. And in fact, the project that you looked at today, they will be paying their fees when they are issued the building permit for the superstructure. So right now they're still doing the groundwork. But that will be another 8,620,000. So that's pretty much doubling the fund almost overnight. The reason we look at the prevailing wages, and those are bold-faced, is typically these large commercial projects do use prevailing wages. It's something they make agreements with the labor, but it's also just, it's necessary. These are complex projects that require that kind of specialized labor. Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, please.
I just want to point out, so if you look at the delta between the 68 and the 55, it's like $13 million. So, you know, we've left $13 million of fees on the table. And I've been meeting, you know, I've had some meetings with labor, and I just wanted to explain to them that, you know, we have considerably sacrificed. 13 million is a lot of money we could put into affordable housing. And we've given that sacrifice up to, you know, incent and encourage the prevailing wage situation over there. And I know it's not union necessarily, but it is commitment to making sure that the people who do work in our city are at least paid appropriately and aren't falling into that $40,000 category. So it's just, you know, those are fees that we have invested into our city to make sure that the people that work here can afford to live here.
That's a good point. And if there are questions, there is a lot of information in here, and this is actually like the Cliff Notes version. So, you know, just go for the ride. We'll have some chances for questions, but nobody can really absorb all this in one shot. And again, that's why we had 4 different meetings. Some of the costs that go into developing housing, there's the direct costs. So that's the labor and materials. But there's also soft costs. You don't want to forget about that. Designing, the marketing, all of that. There's the land that is really, particularly in Burlingame places, expensive markets like this, that's really driving a lot of the costs. And then the developers do need a profit, or if it's a nonprofit, they need a fee. If they can't make a profit, that's what they're in business for, and the project just doesn't happen. So it's not like, it's kind of a yes or no, not so much how much profit. There's also the operating costs if it's a rental project. We talked about capital stacks. This is the financing term, and these are probably highly simplified capital stack diagrams. Let's say we have a $162 million project, which happens to be the amount of the one under construction in downtown San Mateo. If you're seeing that, that's where these numbers are coming from. Typically, a project will have a bank loan. In this case, with the Kiku crossing, it was $72 million. That leaves then 90 million unfunded. If it's a private development, then they may have equity partners or some kind of, there are people in this room that know much more about this than I do. So, but if it's a nonprofit or a affordable housing, then typically a lot of the unfunded balance comes from tax credits, tax credit financing. But there's usually a gap still. So in the case of this not theoretical example, this is a real project, there was still a gap of $16 million after both the bank financing and the tax credits. So that's where these funds can come in and close the gap. And indeed, the Eucalyptus Grove Apartments, they got very complicated financing. It comes from the county, it comes from feds. Who knows? Yeah, it's a pretty complicated stack. They did say if we could waive basically the public facilities impact fee amount, that would close the gap and they would be fully financed. So, technically we instead said, well, we'll give a reimbursement and say, we're not going to waive the fee, but put in 1.4, and that allowed the project to go forward. The cost to the city, this is a bargain.
You will never see this number again.
We'll never see this again. 20,756 per unit. And in fact, so just to give you some perspective, Village of Burlingame, the city put in the land, didn't put in much cash beyond that, but the land is valuable. And that land came out to, if you look at the appraised value of a downtown parking lot in Burlingame, that came up to about 91K per unit. So that is already, now in that case, we did not have the fees yet. So this was basically the city put in the land, and that's how the deal was able to work. As we mentioned, Eucalyptus Grove was the bargain of the century at 21K. Kiku Crossing under construction downtown San Mateo is kind of in between, and that included both land and subsidy from the city.
I do wonder, are any of you wondering why you didn't see Eucalyptus Grove? Or you all know about it?
No, I know. I figured I had ways for them to even save more money because there were some things on there I didn't like that I wish they came off.
So
Anyway.
I do think it's worth just reminding that one did not go through planning commission because of state law.
That's right. And so some of these, and this will be in the future, there's a state law, Senate Bill 35, which does allow 100% affordable housing developments to go through administratively. So they are required to comply with objective development standards and design standards. So staff does check to make sure that this really is meeting the standards, but it does not have the benefit of design review from the Planning Commission or City Council.
Mr. Mayor, can I ask a quick question?
Yes, please.
On the Village of Burlingame, the 91,000 per square unit, does that take into consideration the cost of the parking structure?
No. So yeah, so that we could drill down on that more. So this is really just looking at how much is the land worth. And then I think we did probably include the amount that the land on the structure is sitting on. But then just divided it by 132, and that gave. So that is interesting, and we'll get into a little bit, just probably a side comment on projects that have other pieces to them that are of interest beyond housing. So in that case, it was parking. There may be another project where maybe there's childcare or early education or something like that.
Kevin, I apologize because I didn't manage the first item so well, but I do want to make sure we leave room for our commission members to speak as well, and obviously for Q&A. So,
Sure.
But Jen, did you have a question now?
Just since we have that, can you go back one?
Sure.
Since we had the slide. So I'm not known for my math skills, but I thought that isn't that property rented by them? Leased?
The
whole-
Village of
like, rent-
Burlingame,
Or did we actually?
that was, so it is sold, but with a
Oh,
buyback option.
Has a buyback option on it.
that was it. Okay, it's the parking lot is.
And then the
ours.
parking lot is
Ours.
owned
That
by
was
the
it.
city, and they developed.
Okay.
Yes, and so you get into all kinds of, land
Thank you.
leases and sales and all this, and so what I'm gonna do is kind of breeze through some slides, knowing this is so just to show you what the committee looked at, they looked at the upsides as well as the downsides of gap financing. You know, you get a lot of bang for the buck, but the timeline is long, as we know. And generally the projects have to be pretty big. The other thing the committee became really interested in is what's property acquisition, or what's now being called naturally occurring affordable housing. So if you hear somebody say NOAA, this business has tons of acronyms. Everybody loves them. So NOAA is another one. And this was an example they looked at. It was on the market at the time. Speaking of Broadway, it was right there at 1130 Paloma. It was a fourplex for sale for 2.7 million. And thank you to Sandy Council, gave us a couple of different, how would the city finance this? And one would be to buy it with cash. That's a high acquisition per unit, 675,000. But then look, you've got an income stream. And that's something that's worth pointing out. These are generally one-time funds. The project is built, the funds are paid, that's it. They're not recurring. This would be a way to create a start of a recurring income stream, depending on how it's financed. On the other hand, you could finance it and then have a loan, and then that means you can buy more buildings or what have you. So every idea has many variations, and that kind of kept it complicated. The upsides are immediate impact. These would be available now for people working here in Burlingame right now. It could help the people that are living in the building, and over time you could stabilize the rents. But it is a higher cost per unit. You're pretty much buying the unit as opposed to leveraging to build construction. So you're getting, fewer households are benefiting.
Kevin, on that, one other benefit
Sure.
I would add is that because we would own the property, even if we leased it out to third-party management, those essentially the funds remain with us. Whereas when we give a developer funds, those are a one-way out stream. So if, for example, we needed those funds to give to a developer, you could sell one of these properties and move it along.
That's right. Yeah, there's a certain kind of land banking quality to it as well. And again, I want to say none of these are not competing with each other. That's the idea of the baskets, is maybe there's one basket with this and one with this, and maybe a percentage go, because each have pros and cons. And these were the things that the committee looked at. How many new homes, what level of affordability, what level of income do we want to target? Are there services and amenities that we want to look at that would not otherwise occur, and particularly if the city's in the driver's seat? That was something that was interesting to the committee. We also discussed preference criteria, and this is something we would want some feedback on in upcoming projects.
Sorry, just to be clear, this means if there's an affordable unit, and how do you rank order the applicants for it?
Thank you. Yeah, exactly. So, and that's a question that comes up. Who gets to live here? Who gets first dibs? So the Anson, which was the first kind of big project that came through with 29 affordable moderate units, had a somewhat complicated priority structure with people who work in the city, the fire department, school district, and then people who live in the city, people who work in the city, and then people who live and work in San Mateo County. More recent developments have simplified it and basically just said, let's look at people who are employed in the city of Burlingame, whether it's private or public. It's kind of neutral on that. Then people who live in city of Burlingame come next, and then finally members of the general public. We can look at this with any of the developments, including the village. That's still up for discussion, is the preference criteria for that project. So the committee generally liked the more simplified one on the right, but we can also hear from people here. And then finally, we're getting to the end here. There's both the proactive, where the city initiates something. So like the Village of Burlingame, the city put out an RFP, said we've got this parking lot, let's make this happen. On the other hand, is the Eucalyptus Apartments. Were we ready to act? Yes. Fortunately, there was money in the bank, and the city was able to take advantage of an opportunity that came kind of out of left field. But we didn't really see it till it got here. So again, not mutually exclusive, but I think you want to be nimble and be ready to either be proactive or responsive accordingly. The committee we did some games to try to like, what do you do with all this information, and how do you prioritize? We brought out the poker chips. People got to kind of vote and do all kinds of stuff. We had everybody having, really honest conversations in a circle, and it was really a good process, but also led to a good outcome. And I think as you may have seen in the findings report, there was interest in two big ideas. One would be the purchasing of the existing multi-unit buildings, and that's really a quick deployment. That's something that could happen very quickly, and would be able to preserve low rents or reduce rents over time.
Yeah.
But then all longer term, we do, the village will, right now it's on track to open in September. We know that it's kind of moved along, it's had some hiccups in the process, but so those do take longer, but then you get a lot of units and for, pretty good investment. So committee was interested in those. They were particularly interested in, and the reason I mentioned city-owned land is that does allow the city to kind of create the rules a little more. With Eucalyptus Grove, it kind of came fully baked and the city kind of puts in its piece, but a lot of decisions had already been made, whereas the village, we were able to figure out how much goes to seniors, how much goes to workforce, add a parking garage. That's something that's different when the city is kind of leading the team there. So I want to thank you. This is a lot of information. I want to thank our committee members and invite them to speak and share their experiences. And we really appreciate it. Is a lot of hard work, and we hope that they will also be available in the future for kind of pitch hitting on things as they come up. But with that, I will turn it back over, and perhaps Michael and Donna also want to, as the
What I'd like to do,
subcommittee.
being mindful of time, I'd like to let Donna give her overview of the process and the outcomes. And then I'd like to invite Athen and Tish to come to share, both your perspectives on the substance, but also on the process and so forth. Keeping all of our comments a little bit concise, but I'd like to do that next so that you all have that input, and then we can go into a conversation. So Donna, will you kick us off?
Sure, thank you. So first of all, thank you for coming tonight, Tish and Athen. Really appreciate it. I think the process, we explored many options of what to use with this money, and many different ideas were had, including things like, can you do universal basic income with these? And the way it works is by setting this framework of, really wanting to work toward accommodating the lowest income members of our community, the most vulnerable members of our community. That set the framework for the rest of it. And I will also say that Peter just asked me a question, which is, do these count to our RHNA numbers? And I will say, we didn't really work off that as our starting point. And I want to make that very clear. Preservation of housing for people who already live and work here and making sure they can stay and don't have to move is just as important to us as meeting some fabricated state of Sacramento RHNA number that, we've already met. And we really don't even have a way to force builders to build that. So we wouldn't get RHNA credit for the existing units, but if we ever redeveloped, that would be important. And I think one thing that I really heard from, especially like our home care providers, our childcare providers, was the immediacy of the need for us to act on this money and not just bank it and sit on it and let it accumulate, but to get it invested. So, with that, I think I'd like to invite up the rest of our colleagues just to maybe
Tish,
if anybody has any other comment. You don't have to. You can say it was all.
But you're here.
Yeah, but you might as well.
And I
I just don't want to put people on the spot who aren't comfortable.
I'll also acknowledge we have at least one committee member on Zoom as well. So
Oh, okay, good.
After, yeah, no.
Go ahead.
Thank you, Tish.
I came out of interest. I didn't know that we would be invited to speak, so this is definitely off the cuff. First of all, I want to comment on the process. The process was really great and well managed. There was an incredible amount of information to learn. And I actually had been through looking at, as part of a group, affordable housing in Burlingame as a novice. I'm an educator, not a housing specialist. And so tax credits, I barely had under my belt when this committee started. And I'm sure that there are people on the committee who had more understanding and expertise, and probably some who had less. So we spent a lot of time educating about all the possibilities. In fact, in some ways, I think this process, if people could have stuck with it, could have been expanded to probably a couple of more meetings. But I think what really came out of the process was a focus on process. We weren't there to say, spend the money this way, spend the money that way, but rather to give the city and those who have decision-making authority or advisory authority our best thinking about what are some different options to explore and what are the upsides and the downsides of them. So it was more us educating a broader group of people, namely people who will be making decisions. I think there were, for me, a couple of takeaways. First of all, I really would commend the report to you from the CAC, because I think you'll see some things in there that, because of the brevity of time tonight, Kevin, who was a great staff member along with Joe and Sandy, Kevin was not able to share tonight in terms of our thinking about various things, like, for example, we're suggesting not focusing totally on the lowest income, but actually going several levels up, all still within the affordability range and making it affordable. Secondly, what really drove, I think, the committee in my experience, and I facilitated a lot of committees in school district work, is really focusing on what are the values. And the values are what I heard when I came in on the previous meeting, which is making this a place to live that's inclusive for everyone who would like to live in Burlingame as best we can, as well as to maintain a sense of community. And I think that really drove a lot of the discussions, even when people didn't articulate that beyond the first couple of meetings. Thirdly, an important takeaway for me was really the importance of the city, and any city who has the opportunity with these funds, to be nimble and be able to respond. Now, the committee didn't come down on one side or the other of bank it or not bank it, but I think that the committee's members were very interested in trying to be nimble and trying to perhaps be more assertive than cities have been in the past. And I don't know about Burlingame per se. I do know I'm not a Burlingame resident. I was invited to come on this committee, perhaps because I'm associated with a church here, and also serve on Samaritan House Board, which has services in this community. But to really be assertive in saying, we really want to develop this housing, or we want to buy this housing, or one thing that's touched on in the report, quite a debate about ADUs. And you should read that part of the report. But in many ways, just saying the city is really interested in doing it, and we have some cash to help support doing it. And so I think that, to me, was probably the biggest takeaway, is rather than recommendations, really the process and being out front and encouraging, so that this money doesn't just sit there while prices go up.
Right.
Because what you can buy today is not what you can buy tomorrow.
Pretty good for off the cuff, Tish. Athen, would you come and share some thoughts? And then if we can turn to whoever's on I can't see who's on Zoom.
So I empathize with Tish, and you did a much better job at speaking than I'm going to do, for sure.
I'm sure that's not the case.
I didn't really come here to speak, but more or less to show my support for the project. I really think I was delighted to be invited to be a part of it. It really made me enthusiastic and hopeful. And I was really, I've been frankly quite ecstatic about the positive outcome of it thus far. I come from it, from a perspective of, I grew up very poor in Chicago, and my father was an immigrant from Greece who barely spoke English. And I know firsthand what it takes to work your way through the system.
And I know that if it wasn't for small business, my father was always an entrepreneur. My uncle was an entrepreneur. My family were entrepreneurs. They never worked for anyone. They always owned their own businesses. I followed in those same footsteps. Technically, I'm an employee now, but I really am not really an employee, if you knew how I work with this company. But the bottom line is, I understand the challenge, and I love Burlingame. I came to Burlingame unlike some, I think a lot of people come to Burlingame because they want to be here, but I really came here because I wanted to be here. I moved to Burlingame. It was a process. I picked a place, I chose it, I moved here. I'm a lifelong renter by choice. I don't need to rent now, but I still do rent because I like it. It's the preferred lifestyle for me. So I have a unique perspective in that sense. So I was delighted to be a part of this committee and to have the opportunity to contribute. I come from it. I came to the committee. I think probably my path to that committee was because of my concern for small business in Burlingame and having close personal friends of mine who own businesses here in Burlingame and knowing firsthand their experience and their troubles at acquiring people to work for them, to be employees, and one of my friends actually thinking about buying an apartment building in Burlingame so that he could offer housing as part of the package. And he pays well, by the way. It's not like this isn't sub-minimum wage or part-time work. This is full-time, well-paid, above the median, the first 1 or 2 tiers of AMI. So it's a problem. And I've seen businesses that I like in Burlingame close because they couldn't fill the shifts. They couldn't find people to work. So that's how I came to where I'm at now. I think also what I appreciated about this committee is it did become clear to me that the leadership in Burlingame is very serious about issues like of the environment, because electric cars are not a car is a car, commuting is commuting. Someone's coming from Hayward to come here to work. That's sort of needless. They should be able to live where they work. And I was really thrilled, and I just want to give the credit to everyone because it really struck me. Having said all that, my approach once on the committee was because of, I gave you some of my background so you can kind of see how, even though my work is developing long-term strategies, I also am very focused on near-term strategies because survival is a big part of growing up poor. So how do I immediately address the problem? So I really tried to focus on the base AMI, the sub $40,000 income, and how we could do that. So I was, again, delighted to find that a lot of people were very open-minded about things like finding ways to maybe get more ADUs or tiny houses, or buying existing infrastructure, multi-unit residential, converting it ASAP, and addressing the problem right away. There was a sense of triage. So I think that this committee really surprised me. I think a lot of people, if they really took a deep dive into it, would be surprised at how well thought out this was. It's been addressed a number of times. I mean, the sum of money, $68 million, people go like, oh, that's a lot of money. It's nothing. And it's very complicated. So really, I'm just trying to speak in support. Again, I didn't expect to speak. I think the report, I read through the report. I agree with it wholeheartedly. And I just really want to thank Mayor Brownrigg and Vice Mayor Colson. I think you did excellent work. Gardner and everyone. It's really, I'm very appreciative of it, and I'm looking forward to seeing the results.
Thank you
of
for
this.
this. Thank you for the time you put into it, Athan. And is there a comment online?
If there's anyone online who would like to speak, please raise your hand.
Hi, everyone. My name is Angelina Soldatos. I was also a committee member. I apologize for not being able to be there tonight. It'll be very hard to follow up Tish and Athan. However, I just wanted to say it was a privilege being able to partake in the meeting alongside my colleague, Rovi Antonio, as a committee member. I want to thank every single committee and staff member for providing a space that amplified a collaborative environment that uplifted and heard all diverse perspectives. And I think that shows in the report. I want to call out the amazing effort and execution of every single perspective captured in the CAC report. I believe the committee worked with one goal in mind, and that was finding solutions-based frameworks for the utilization of available housing funds in Burlingame. And in the end, I think we all came to an understanding of the needs of the city. And the needs include affordable housing, preserving naturally occurring affordable housing, and even the exploration of a potential first-time home buying program. And I just love the idea that we're able to make a very big difference in Burlingame. And I think that the committee is an example of leadership with equity in mind. We addressed, and Tish mentioned this earlier, all economic levels and assessing the community needs based on data-driven logic. I'm very proud of the work we did, and I want to thank everyone again. And I look forward to working with Burlingame and its vibrant residents and community. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Angelina. Well, that's a lot to throw at everyone else. Obviously, Donna and I went through it, but are there questions or comments that anybody has? Yeah, Sandy.
I just don't want to forget our seniors.
Mhm.
I think we're talking about the people that, are making money and that live here and work here. But a lot of the seniors can't actually stay in their homes anymore. So it'd be nice to, if they're going to move on and maybe sell their homes, might open up some opportunities there as well.
That's a great point. We're looking forward to seeing if the Peninsula Wellness comes forward, and that's an exciting opportunity for that demographic too.
And that Peninsula Wellness is one of the potential projects that we're holding money aside that they may need a match through the county. I'm on the HCDC board and I've already seen it come through. So that would be a perfect example of sort of strategy too, which is keeping money aside to fund that gap for all those affordable units.
Right. Question, Ricardo.
Just a comment, Mr. Mayor, I'm just glad that we, Michael. I'm just glad that we are considering options for first-time home buyers or for buying property to provide stability and generate wealth for these people. I think that that's a really important aspect of this.
Great. Sean.
Just a quick question. Does the word housing extend to infrastructure of housing and what supports housing? Or is it simply just the residences that people reside?
You mean like sewer and water?
And schools? I haven't seen a lot of pointing towards schools, and in my demographic, I get asked this all the time. I hear all this housing going, and how are they going to go to school? And I was doing a little research before, and for every 100 units of housing, there's 41 kids involved. And we're already, as a father who just went through preschool and trying to get kids into daycare, which was a crapshoot at some point, and now we're luckily in Hoover Elementary, that was just redone recently, but it's maxed out. And you have BIS and BHS, which I think are at the top of their capacities. I'm just wondering if there's any correlation with these funds and maybe infrastructure costs.
So I'll take a quick crack at that. Certainly, if the school district were to come forward with a housing project that might be for teachers, for example, that would clearly fit in the workforce. How does the city put money to work? I do think what you heard from the committee was a bias for action. So we're going to try to balance, that bias for near-term action versus holding something in reserve for a great project. So, I regret to say that the canary in the coal mine is that this is the first year where enrollment has fallen. And every year that I've been in Burlingame, Burlingame School District enrollment has risen faster than the San Mateo County average, which tells you that we have been better at attracting young families with kids. This year, that's different. This year, we have fewer kids, and that's not because people are having fewer children. It's because young families are getting pushed out by housing costs. So all to say, yes, we have to be real mindful of the impact on schools. It's a topic that comes up at the school liaison, city school liaison. But to be honest, what the schools are looking at this year and next is a decline in enrollment.
But I think the question being, can you spend this money, say, for example, to acquire a parcel, is no. The money is designated specifically for affordable housing. And that's how the linkage fees works and the nexus works. We're not allowed to use it for that kind of infrastructure, but it could create space for us in other ways to have other resources to potentially use for that.
Yeah.
Thanks to the committee for incredible work. I've read the report twice and I realize I need to go back and read it at least 2 or 3 more times again, because I think that there's so many more nuggets that the discussion brought out. So thank you all. Couple of quick questions I'll throw out there for our future discussion that may even be worth having for us when we have to make some decisions, I think Tuesday, right? And I think Sean's question about the kids and the schools is one we do get asked a lot. Maybe have some information. We learned a lot in the general plan process about child generation rates, right? For certain kinds of housing, statistically, and data shows generate different kinds of attraction for families or single people. So that might be an interesting thing to think about in the context of next steps. There was a slide up there about the preferences for the different housing. I thought that was fascinating. I have some questions about when federal tax credits or other tax credits are used, at what level of preference can we actually preference local, or according to fair housing law, I was under the impression you really can't preference. So I'd like to learn more about that. Donna, thank you for your add-in about being able to maybe use some of these funds to subsidize additional or deeper levels of affordability or more affordability in other public projects or nonprofit projects. And I think I was going to ask a clarification question on that, but I think you brought that out in the second point about working with other agencies. So I think that's a really great idea. I love the concept of quick deployment and preserving existing housing, as I think the Vice Mayor mentioned, just keeping people living here who may not otherwise have that opportunity. So I think that's a really exciting opportunity. It comes back to the fact that who would ever thought we would have had $55 to $68 million. I think we can take some risks and try some different things. I know that's not the be all end all, but it gives us an opportunity to maybe try to buy a small, infill project and see how that goes and keep it as an asset, and then do more subsidizing and then do something over here. So I'm excited to take some risks with this money. First time home buying opportunity sounds incredible. The one other thing I just want to throw out there as a question, we won't have time to discuss tonight, but from the very beginning when we talked about these fees, and again, we never knew we'd have this much coming in or realizing, the council had talked about the opportunity of maybe setting aside a small portion for emergency rental assistance along, that same vein of keeping people here that are literally have no savings, one paycheck away from a disaster, working with Samaritan House as we did during the pandemic, or it doesn't have to be a huge portion, but I would be interested in knowing how Samaritan House helped execute that program, what their needs are in Burlingame, and if there could be a small portion to help, again, keep people from being unhoused, keep people from the community from being displaced. In the world I work in the nonprofit world, sometimes just $500 to $1,000 can be a game changer and keep a family housed where they are. So I think that would be something I would continue to like to explore. And I think the council had some unanimous interest in that along the journey. Thank you for the great discussion.
I appreciate it. And I'm gonna actually, your comment, this item is being presented to City Council on Tuesday at the Tuesday Council. So we can continue and should continue this conversation there. I do want to I want to hold a little bit of space for the question I posed at the beginning But are there any other questions or comments from Planning Commission with respect to this work? Chris?
Just a question, did the committee identify a target metric for how much we should be spending per unit? Eucalyptus was 20, we'll never see that again, but is 150 way too much and it's not a good use of funds?
It's a great question, and I don't think we ever got granular enough. I do think once, and you'll see this, I think in the report, but I think people began to shy away from the $1 million a unit, which is what it costs if you just were to build something on your own. That did not seem, I don't want to put words in the committee members' mouths, but did not seem like the best way. So I think the question was always, how can we leverage, how does this capital leverage other capital to make something happen? I think that was a bias. Jen?
So I don't know, it's a little off the wall question, but I'm just curious, just came in my head. So some of these already built apartment houses that there was the one there on, is it Paloma? I don't know. You know, they're probably 50s, from the 50s, if they need repairs. So I'm just wondering, I know the city has enough to do and doesn't probably want to get into managing a project on top of it, but are there vehicles to use people who are in the trades to fix them, that are maybe they're going to get a unit or they're working toward it and they'll work to improve it, to keep the, you know, sweat equity. I don't know how to manage that. It's just I'm just throwing it out there.
Yeah, that's a great idea.
I don't know.
Yeah, we'll see if we can work on John.
But also maybe a piggyback is we are exploring the soft story and maybe as an opportunity of trying to accomplish, you know, as maybe a landowner, it may not be as attractive to me. But if the city were saying, I want to buy an interest of getting a lower rent, but yet I'll put in soft story money and leveraging it in both directions, we could potentially improve our older stock to be more livable, yet buying it with affordability chips.
Yeah, that's a cool idea.
And make
too.
it safer, John, too,
Well-
which, so, yeah, right? Like
But
that.
that's hard to do at this point
Right.
because, you know, the rents aren't going up to make it more attractive to do these things. So
Right.
unless we as a community put money towards it, it's hard.
Yeah, and yeah, Sandy.
Real quick, do we know what our vacancy rates are on our units now? Do we have any numbers of how many units are available within the city?
We don't. It would be probably fairly straightforward to get vacancy rates for the newer construction because those are kind of, there are organizations that track those. It's harder on the individual mom and pop buildings just because we just don't have that data.
I'm sorry, Sandy, were you asking about in general or the
Just
VMR?
in general, I mean, how many,
okay.
Good
you know,
question.
we weren't seeing a lot of signs go up on El Camino and around town, and now you drive down El Camino and you see for rent here and for rent there. So it'd be interesting to see what our mom and pops, you know, rentals are available out there.
I appreciate that. Yeah, Donna. and
So
then
I
we'll
think
close
that,
it out.
yeah, that was one of the reasons we were focusing on this potential acquisition, because a lot of those mom and pops maybe don't want to rent anymore. They want to get out of the business. And then those are the ones that get spun over, and then the property taxes go way up. As of course, if we own these buildings, they would be exempt from property taxes, which is one of the ways we keep the property rents much lower. And it wouldn't be about displacing people. It'd be about finding people that are already living in what we'll call naturally affordable, that some of these people have, and making sure that through the city ownership and the delta between, you know, the new property tax base and what we would pay, which is zero, we can then work to keep those targeted rentals down. And as people moved out, then you would have the ability to even lower those rents, so long as you could either service your debt, and all the rents and any money would come back into the fund and then recycle through. And I think that was one of the main points that people wanted to make, was they didn't want to make gifts like we talked about. should we give people money to build an ADU in their backyard? We just didn't feel like a homeowner, an existing homeowner who already owns an expensive home shouldn't be given $250,000 to build an ADU that we just can't control who they rent and who they don't rent to.
Yeah.
So it was a little more focused on that. And of course, if we were to do this program, there would be a proposal out, because I don't think Kevin and his staff have time to do the rental of all these properties, the management. We would absolutely have to have a third party expert.
Yeah. All right. So we will be able to continue this conversation on Tuesday. I look forward to sharing some work that we're doing at the Heart Board that's directly relevant to this, but I'm going to close it out now. I invite our planning commissioners, if you'd like to join us on Tuesday, virtually or in person, to hear the ongoing part of this conversation. With respect to the general plan, I'm gonna shelve that item just because of the interest of time. But it's really interesting. I mean, we have been so successful that you want to do the headline, the elevator pitch.
So yeah, I'll just say general plan will be next January. It'll be 5 years old, and that's a good time to look at what we thought would happen versus what is happening. And I think what we've seen is office is way up here, commercial is down here, industrial is down there. So we'll be doing a reset, which will mean looking at the environmental impact report, and that will be coming to a planning commission and a city council near you. So we just wanted to kind of daylight that and let you know that this will be occurring in the next year.
So with that, and because I do really believe in ending on time, especially in late evenings and letting people get home, I am going to do the lightning round. And if you don't have you don't have something at the top of mind, that's no problem. But I'd love to hear something that you're proud of that you've accomplished through the commission or on the council with respect to land use, what we've been talking about, and something you'd like to see us work on. And Sandy, I'll put you on the spot first.
I think we've done a great job in looking at the designs of these projects that have come before us. I know that we don't have a lot of say on some of these projects, but I think we've handled it really well as a planning commission in general.
Agreed.
And I think, what was the second one?
Something you'd like to work on in the year ahead, or the city to work on.
I would really, I always go to the lighting aspect of what's going on over on the Bayfront and keeping our looking at our lights out there and how it's going to affect the ambiance out on the Bayside.
Great.
That's really interesting to me.
Great observation. John?
I think that the change in use out by the Bay Shore is yielding a lot of great project opportunities. And I think that what I'd like to see is do more of is working with these developers a little earlier to really help them understand that it's not just office space that they're selling out there or their main use, but it is encouraging that development of ground level community. So many of them just say, I want to put a 2,500 square foot food and beverage on the ground floor, and that's my give. That's barely a Starbucks. Where we are displacing Max's, we're displacing others through this. And how do we get more space into these programs
for retail
such that, and it's not even just retail, because you do see a lot of people, oh, ground floor retail, we got to have it. Well, that doesn't always work.
Right.
It might not even work out there because who's going to go?
Okay.
But it is getting them to program expanded uses beyond just office and tenant use, and creating space for public engagement and additional outsourced business to be involved.
Great point.
And not just, we're going to close our doors.
Thank you, John. Jen?
So I'm gonna go the quick way. I'm gonna say ditto to both of those. Really good. And this will come as no surprise. Where I think we should be doing better is, and I don't know how to solve it, is as we are becoming in all areas denser, I am very concerned of the loss of any vegetation, green space that gives the air that you're talking. I mean, that is what made us special for so many years, that sort of green environment, the leafy, and that's disappearing just by default. And it's very hard to manage that, I know, because of what's coming down on us, but I hate to see that go because I just see a lot of built space and no air, like breathing space. And I think
The urban forest.
it's the urban forest, but it's more than, and now we really depend on our street trees more than ever because sometimes they're all we have. But you know, it's also little things like you know, I spent the first 5 years in the city, and our yard was probably, I thought it was big. It was probably like, you know, 10 by 10. And I spent a lot of time just looking at stuff. As a kid, you don't necessarily have parents that can take you to the park every minute. It's nice to have some space in your apartment. You can go out and look at your little area and just study insects and stuff. That's all disappearing. It's not, you know, it doesn't have to be a huge big thing at each parcel. There has to be something. And I just see, I don't know a way out. That's very upsetting to me. So
And a great focus. Thank you. Sean.
I'm really proud of the gravity of the improvements along the Bayshore waterfront. The public amenity is going to be, in 10 years, is going to be crazy how good it's going to be with the new Bay Trail and some of these public plazas, which sometimes I scoff at, but it is going to be nice to have a reprieve. And on that point, to John's point, you know, we still need more public amenities. Everyone I talked to is so excited about Topgolf, and that's a great amenity that's going to come in. We have a lot of people that are going to be coming to Burlingame. I saw that 28,000 people in 2019 work in Burlingame. That number is probably going to double in the next 10 years. So I'm looking forward to more public amenity, more restaurant, more places for people to congregate, the plaza. That's what I'm looking forward to.
Great. Thank you for that. Chris.
Yeah, I'm proud of the commission just furthering the kind of character of Burlingame, the neighborhoods, the downtown and the Bay Shore. So the quality, I think, is improving in terms of the projects that are being presented. You know, we do see projects one at a time. And so one of the things that I think is a gap is just keeping an eye on the cumulative impact of all this development, maybe along the lines of what the other commissioner said.
Thank you for that. And I'm going to race through my colleagues. So Ricardo.
What I'm really proud of, and I think you and I have talked about it many times, is that we've been able to increase our housing stock the way we have without damaging our neighborhoods, our traditional neighborhoods. I think we've done a good job of that. I think some people might disagree with me, but I'm very proud that we've been able to do that. What do I want to work on looking forward is to continue to do that, because the pressure to build these monster projects inside of our neighborhoods is going to still be there. And hopefully we can push back.
Thank you for that. Emily.
Proud of what an incredible team we have at the city staff, and thank you, planning commissioners, for all you do. Thanks, colleagues on council. Really thrilled that we're going to fix El Camino next year. Like, really, the money's there. We're going to do it. It's going to be transformative. Talk about land use, talk about improving livability, safety, and quality of life for so many of those small or, you know, some of our lowest income housing stock along El Camino, and it's going to be so much better for the community. So very proud of that. What needs to be done? We have to get Broadway grade separation funded. We will be dogged, we will be relentless, and we will get it done. But at least the project is in final design and we're ready when the money's there.
Excellent. I feel like I went first, so I'm going to pass myself and over to Donna.
Okay. Thank you. So the thing that I'm most proud of that we've done in last year is we have $1 billion of infrastructure need for sea level rise on the Bayfront. And we figured out a way, sort of first in the state of California, leading the way in San Mateo County, to set a standard by which we can get that done, and we can get help from the developers so that the taxpayers are not paying for every single element of that. I think it was very forward looking, and I appreciate all the work that the Planning Commission did on that, and my colleagues did to support that work at One Shoreline and the staff. I'm going to cheat and do two. This is a crazy one, but Jen, this is for you, baby. I would really love us at some point to do a cataloging of the historic, having an outside assessment of what the homes are historic in this city. And it's because all these poor homeowners buy something, then they find out it's historic, then they're crying because they don't understand it. I think many of them who have gone through this would have asked, why don't we do this? And why couldn't we do it? It's expensive, but you know, it's just something to think about down the road. And then the last one is just this, how to figure out how to maybe turn some of these rentals into condos and how to increase the affordability of homeownership at the entry level in Burlingame, which I would love to see anything on this market for sale under $1 million so that they could qualify for HART and first-time homebuyer financing. And it might take some really creative thinking and some relooking at our zoning and our code to allow those transfers, but it would be really important way to keep people in Burlingame.
Peter, bring us home.
You're not going last?
No, I went first.
No, I think, first of all, I ditto everybody's comments. Really makes you proud of the work that everybody's done together. I think I'm very proud in my 4 or 5 short months on the council of our staff that helped support all of this to happen. So kudos to the team. I'm very proud of the fact that we are seriously taking on housing issues and affordability. And we're doing it very thoughtful and at the same time protecting some of the characteristics that drew us to Burlingame in the first place. My wife's a school teacher in Burlingame School District, formerly up until about a year ago. Half the staff at different elementary schools are leaving because the teachers, who are a lot younger than her, can't stay. They just can't do it, and they don't want to put up with the commute. I'm also proud that we need to do more on that front. And so when I think about the rental market in where I live along Rollins Roads, there's plenty of examples of how about either renovation, either owning, either, encouraging affordability and protecting that so that people can stay there. Because I know that there's a lot of pressure on them. So those are a couple.
I appreciate that. Thank you all very much for your evening tonight. I hope you found this productive. Kevin, I'm going to let you have the last word.
Just want to thank everybody. We appreciate this. It's nice to spend an evening with you and have kind of a little more informal way and catch up on a few things. And this will continue with the commission and the council on these various items. So thank you for this input, and take snacks with you on your way out the door. We do need to be out of the building by 9. So
let's go.
Out we go. Thank you. Meeting adjourned.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Mike.
Thank you, Mike.
Oh, is it downstairs?
Good job, Kevin. Walked here. I think we're on.
Seeing you guys in 3D.
Absolutely. You're not on mute.
Chair. I know, we're not on mute. That's right.
I know. I was working.
Bye, Jen.
Got so much done.
Got some work to do on the.
That's neat.
On,
That's neat.
the ordinance.
Yeah.
We also need to. We formed the current district by resolution. So
Yeah.
you have to do like for like. And so you have to, so I think
We should develop that cash flow.
Resolution.
Wasn't that the whole thing that you like got them from Persona saying that you didn't need to do anything?
Well, it's part of the,
Sorry, how
it's
did
part
you
of the
hand you-
legislative actions that will be taken.
Yeah. I'll take the heat from
John today.
But the other cities don't have to
Oh
do
my
it.
gosh, the other cities don't have to do it, right? We just have to do
Hi,
it.
Peter.
It's actually, because it becomes.
All right, anyway, so it's just. Thank you very much.
All right, guys, I'm going to head out.
What's that?
General plan, 5 years, it's gonna be 5 years old.
Yeah.
I didn't call them out.
I was multitasking.
You're right, Gerald. is-
I was being productive.
Gerald is the name there. And I was talking about,
Thanks for being here.
And,
Yeah. Could you see the?
You said 3 people.
Is there another one over there? Oh, okay, good.
Ross is a good.
It's funny. I didn't quite realize that. Yeah.
I think you explained yourself well, which
Yeah.
is you
Way to
weren't
go.
saying somebody shouldn't talk. It's just that you should make sure that other people do.
And
Oh my God.
it's have a voice. I mean, that is
He
the
flipped his
problem.
lid.
Like, if everybody just depends on John to be their megaphone. And all those businesses didn't come to meetings because they think John's gonna look out.
No,
That's not okay.
I agree.
Where are you going?
Thank you, Ruben.
He's just-
Thank you
he's
very
just-
much.
He's just such a.
Just keep going there. I think you're actually going to.
Yep, like this.
Are you off to Vegas?
I hate Vegas too. I think it's awful.
Oh, okay.
I saw some pictures of your jaunt. Yeah, and you don't know how much other people then who abdicated are not getting me on that trip before Gina went on that trip.
No, I know.
Businesses on California. And I was like, what is this all about?
He's a professional hiker. He had all the right garb on and
Right?
everything.
How do we?
I think I was at Sandals or something.
It all worked out. It was a fun hike.
I know, I gotta get on that.
It seems like they go a lot.
I wanna
That-
go.
Between.
That one guy from Sunnyvale, that was his fourth time.
Wow.
So yeah,
Gustav.
Gustav, yeah.
All right, safe travels.
Have a good trip.
See you later. I'm not really. I might take a snack for tomorrow.
Nanners.
Thanks for being here.
Jeremy, are you here tomorrow?
Yeah. It's a 5-day.
No, we're okay. We just have to.
You guys, you have Friday duty?
I have Friday. It's all right.
To engage.
I'll bring a mattress and I'll sleep on the desk.
I think I'm debating whether or not I'm gonna come in tomorrow. I think I will. Let's get more done.
I know, I do too. I don't know why.
Well, it's a little, it's also a little easier right now because
That's true.
I found anyway.
I agree.
Because I think school is out.
He's mad because
And
I don't think.
now that the weather is nice, we're just traveling more.
Maybe that's it too.
Waste the most city time.
But okay, hopefully I'll see you tomorrow. If
Okay.
not, then I'll see you next week.
Yeah, sure.
He made his point, but then he made.
And what's his point? His point is that he represents all of Burlington Broadway and that the other people that are on there don't have a voice. And it wasn't Chris, it was him. Gerald's also very loudmouthy over there and doesn't want any change.
thought it was kind of
I was talking about Gerald and talking about me. But the fact that he took all offense and everything is what basically said, and
He does.
he does it. He does it.
I know. He kind of just added. Yeah.
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 There's.
come back and say.
Yeah, I don't know why you got so upset. I wasn't talking about, I'm not talking about any one particular person. I'm just saying there are some very loud voices over there. Obviously yours is one of them because you just made it known.
Yeah, we just got into public process.
No, but like Gerald winds people up. He doesn't want anything to change over there. And Rob too, he's more quiet, right? But like,
It'll be fine, yeah.
we need, like, all those people on California Drive, if they had, like, taken responsibility and been a part of it, then, yeah, I mean, then that would all be, they would have a voice. It's like, you can't abdicate your responsibility for public engagement and then be pissed when something happens that you don't like.
Yeah, exactly.
So you have to continue on.
Yeah.
There's also just.
Yeah, I turned off.
Oh, you did?
Yes.
I wonder if, so I stopped recording, but I didn't end the webinar because I was co-host. Well, I guess we can turn it just back on, I guess. Just hit the power button. Let me just see. Oh, shut down.
Well, there's one. There's one.
That's incredible. That must have been an amazing experience.
Yeah, it was fun.
To be there that long. It's almost like going abroad.
Well, it felt like home, actually. Interesting.
All right, I'm really taking cookies home. Okay?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. Please.
that I don't need to be there for it. No, that's good. I always get lucky about planning to choose it because it's usually. All right, good talking to you, and I did connect with. Yes. Yes, ma'am.
Yes.
I'm glad, at least I had the good sense to pause.
And that's great. And thank you for calling. Like, that's what it's about.
Oh, it's good to see you.
Yeah.
Oh,
And I really liked it. You was very